much, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Kim. Thank you, Lane. Thank you for everybody putting this on. I'm so freaking stoked to be here to talk about hooking brains to things, as I like to call it, to dispense with the pretense of it. And thank you all, first for your generous sponsorship of this excellent organization that's allowing the next generation to explore the bounty that is STEM. But also thank you guys for indulging me and letting me talk about what is, outside of my lovely wife, pretty much the great passion of my life, which is neurotechnology. Dr. Kim talks about innovation with purpose. And I first fell in love with this field because it did two things. It let us help people that previously science couldn't help very well, and then it lets us do things that many of us might fantasize about doing, and it's turning those into reality. But before I get into any of the actual brain stuff, I want to talk about prosthetics for a second, which has no shortage of neurotech possibility, but none of these are direct brain interface. But what I like about these is this brilliant industrial designer, Mr. Scott Summit, looked at prosthetics as a state, and he said, well, they fall into two camps. One is you get a leg that looks like the one you had before and it just works worse. You can't feel with it, it's hard to walk, but it looks realistic. Option B was you get one that's mechanically advantageous to the point that it sparked debate around the Olympics, if you remember. But it's pretty utilitarian and kind of alien in its design. So Scott came at this and he said, well, for this model, we're doing high fashion. For this barista, we're doing modern craftsman. For this outdoorsman, we're going to do a camo ruggedized version. And my absolute favorite is he went as far as to chrome up a freaking prosthetic leg to match your guy's bike. And he said, you know, you've lost a huge part of yourself, your leg. That's like a good 18% of your overall body. And we can't currently repair that or grow you back exactly what you had. But what we can do is build you something that's arguably more you than what you started with. And that is what you get when you inject an artist's humanity into what is otherwise a clinical and technical space. And I think that's an important mindset to carry because the media has portrayed neurotechnology as kind of a not excellent thing. Most of its fictional depiction is a big list of what not to do, starting with like giving someone an artificial guilt complex or trapping them in a mind prison. The dog arms were actually awesome up until they inevitably took over his brain in the second part. So if we could get the arms without the brain takeover, that'd be the sweet spot. But anyway, all of this is very much what not to do. But when you come at it with humanity, the reality of neurotech is something incredibly different and tends to look more like this. This woman was quadriplegic, I could say it. Couldn't move, but totally mentally awake for the past decade. And now, I want to say this was BlackRock and then a university, oh yeah, Pittsburgh, allowed her to, with a brain implant and then this sweet robot arm, actually feed herself, giving you some level of agency and quality of life back. And when you're in that kind of a state, even that level of agency is an enormous improvement. Or Open Bionics creates the Hero arm, which took prosthetics, which can cost, you know, 80 grand, 100 grand. They can print one for 1,500, so that as your kid grows, now you can afford to get him a new limb that fits every year or two, instead of it just having to be this awkward or financially ruinous situation. So not only does it use electromyography, so you have finger articulation, which you need to play with toys, learn at school, and otherwise have a childhood, but it also looks cool. I mean, I know plenty of adults who would sign up for freaking Iron Man arm if they got the chance. And so now instead of being like self-conscious about it, maybe it's something you're kind of excited to get as a kid. This one gets real abstract, which is a guy actually took an interesting challenge. Can I show someone some clips from like various movies and stuff, and then only through brain signal try to reconstruct what they're looking at? And the answer was kind of. Like, is that a perfect match? No, but it's very clearly a signal. And if you develop that tech further, this being as first pass beta version as it gets, it makes you think, could I record my own dreams? What would be the therapy impact of that? Could I put that on someone in a coma and see if they're okay or in pain or trapped in a nightmare? But all of these examples are things that are like helping someone heal from a medical situation that they're in. And BCI doesn't have to be just translational. You can also add stuff that we couldn't do before. And I always come back to this. This dude isn't hurting in any way, but he's practicing handing himself an object in his third hand, as naturally as I might hand one to these. And I don't know how you can look at that and not just start thinking about exoskeletons and Doc Ock arms and drones and all kinds of crazy stuff. So the point of all of this is that neurotech isn't creepy, and hooking brains to things, if done with the right mentality, can be kind of beautiful. So I have two goals with it. Goal one is I believe that mental health treatment for things like PTSD, depression, anxiety lacks good big data fundamentals. And I hope that with applied BCI and AI we can fix that. Number two, and the much more fun, is I want to control a drone with my brain. I have a fantasy of walking through a door and the drone just follows me like a puppy, and I want to make that happen. And I think I actually can, and I want to tell you all how I plan to build it. But the problem is that before we can talk about brain-computer interfaces, we have to talk about brains and computers. So I'm going to start with the brain and say that each of us, well, I'm going to say I flatter myself that I have one of these in my head, but I know you all certainly do in yours, which is 86 billion neurons connected very intricately, where each neuron has its nucleus, and then a long axon where it connects through a synapse to maybe like tens of thousands-ish of other neurons. And so when enough energy collects here, it sends it down to here, and then this one can fire. And everything you do when you have a song stuck in your head, when you're practicing your golf swing, whatever, is running through those synapses to make certain ones fire, where it gets propagated through all of the circuits that run through your brain. And so from well before you're born until the day you die, all of those things are in flux. You have your things like where you see this one get stronger, and then all of a sudden it breaks and gets reevaluated down below. And we call this neuroplasticity. And we used to think that it taps out at a certain point, but we're increasingly finding that while, yeah, it peaks, it never goes to zero. And you can learn until the day you die. And so just as much as we're interested in exploring how genetics makes us who we are, so too are we thinking about connexomics in the Human Connectome Project, which is aiming to wire all of this stuff and figure out the exact map. And when I look at this, I'm stunned, because everything I love about humans, the jazz music, the cubist paintings, the single malt scotch distillation process, all of the things that make me love humans is wrapped up in this structure. And that's really cool if what you care about is knowing how the brain works, and I don't. What I want to do isn't walk away knowing how it works. I want to walk away having connected it to a drone or something. And so the problem with that is that that means that somewhere in here I have to pull a signal out. And brains are typically found in skulls. And as Dr. Hibbert would explain, and my wife might agree, my skull, like yours, can be very thick. And just like shielding on a cable, that means that it hides a lot of the data underneath. The benefit to this is that it's also very physical. So like your brain uses electricity, that electricity, just like your muscles, is powered by blood. And so with every one of those, you can do a side channel attack. And I know that if there's any room in the entire world, I don't have to tell about side channel attacks. It's a room full of defense professionals. But suffice it to say that in the 70s, Van Eck showed that with something as simple as like a microphone, you can reconstruct the test pattern that you're seeing on another display. And so too with the brain. Can we do stuff like underneath all of your scalp and your skull and these layers that make you survive bar fights and stuff, there's still all of the electric potential here from all of those synapses firing. And we get little wavelets. And when we can process those wavelets through electrodes scattered around your skull, we can actually get a pretty kick-ass map of what's all happening. And all of that is powered by blood. And blood has iron, and iron is magnetic, meaning that now we can use magnetic resonance imaging to similarly get a pretty close to real time, some of the really fancy ones can get real time, depiction of what's going on in your head. And out of all of that, we get squiggles. Really excellent classic time series. Each one of these is an electrode, squiggles. And somewhere in that time series squiggle is the command that I want to send to a drone. And as a brain-computer interface researcher, I gotta process that, which brings us to the computer. And specifically, and I'm waiting for a groan, artificial intelligence, deep learning, big data, AI, all of the buzzwords. But what's fun about that is that as early as the 40s or 50s, Alan Turing, who was basically saying, well, at the time a computer is a person who you pay to do math, And he said, I think we can build a computer that does that. Well, he also said, people can learn. I think we can build a computer that does that too. And if I take it further, the idea of tapping into someone's brain with an interface is literally the idea of empathy that we all do for each other to reach out as kind humans, but it's made automated. We're building a machine that can do that, and I find that kind of beautiful, but that's an aside. Alan Turing ended up being correct, because today, when I showed you that synapse, the way we build artificial neurons and neural nets is a very straightforward, kind of a facsimile, but it's slimmed down enough version of the neurons that we originally found in the brain. And what was cool about that is that it mimicked the structure, but what was frustrating was it hit a wall up until we invented this algorithm. Because we knew how to wire a computer like it was a brain, but we didn't know how to make it learn like a brain learns, up until we got this algorithm, at which point we did. And now we have these 10 billion plus parameter networks that Google comes out with every week that can tell us exactly whose face we're seeing in an audience. And what's cool about those is that they process fuzzy data. And while we all think about computers as discrete, most of the world is fuzzy. So it can do something like take this kind of poorly written 7 here, must be my handwriting, and actually puzzle out, yeah, that's well and truly a 7. We've turned it from every combination of pixels that could be in that image down to one of 10 things. We've discretized it. And when you're dealing with squiggles, something that can deal with fuzzy information is incredibly powerful. And this brings us to my favorite thing that exists, which is what I call the great poetry of brain-computer interface. And that is that, in my line of work, we use neuro-inspired algorithms to process data that we pull out of the brain itself. So not only is that some irony that's like Alanis Morissette level of ironic writing, it also is excellent biomimicry. Because when we as engineers and nature converge on the same solution, that's an excellent indication that we're on the right track. So now that we have this, we can go on to the interface. And I like to think of interfaces as an expression of our relationship with technology. And at one point that was very standoffish, like with punch cards. And then we got the UI stuff, joysticks, keyboards, mice, up until the 90s and up through today when we started doing voice commands, touch commands, and even like hand tracking when you put on a VR headset. But when I open out my phone, I still get a keyboard. And I'm gonna ask you guys, who here actually likes typing on a phone keyboard? I hate it. And that's why autocorrect is a thing and why we all turn it off, because it's terrible. But then I put on a VR headset, and I got another damn keyboard. It was just big and in front of me, and I'm having to like point at it like it's large, and it was even slower than on the freaking phone. And I'm like, I refuse to allow that we're trapped in the 50s, and that our relationship with the tech we use every day is just gonna be dominated by keyboards for the rest of their life. And when you think about it, what all of that is doing is what in psychology they call the transmission model, which is I'm thinking of a cat, I encode that in audio waves with my mouth, they make their way over to your ears where your brain decodes them, and if I've communicated well, because I did my Lego team building exercise at my work function, then what you're thinking of is about the same cat that I spoke. And this is not different from the way we interact with the technology. If I'm flying a drone and I say, I want the drone, I was thinking outside when I made this slide, and I say, I want it by the cars over there. What I'm doing is I'm encoding a loop where I push forward, the drone flies forward until it is where I want it to be, and then I let up. And I've communicated, okay, that's the right spot. So my intent here was for the drone to be above a car. And how I had to do that was to encode the move forward command until it got to the stop command, and then I could let up. And all of this is cognitive burden. And so if you replace that joystick with neural interfacing, as this crazy dude actually did and wired himself into a freaking prop plane and flew it and survived against all possible good suggestion, he did. But it didn't buy us anything. Because now, instead of staring straight forward and thinking about holding a flight yoke, I'm staring straight forward and thinking about doing the things I would do with a flight yoke, but with my brain instead. It hasn't bought us actually anything, because the level of focus is the same. Contrast that with this robot, and God, I wish I could find a video, but China's keeping it under lock and key, which should tell you something right there. They invented this robotic arm that could, out of a combination of EEG and muscle signals, figure out what you're trying to do, and help you do it on an assembly line. Like a pair of perfect helping hands. If you've ever been woodworking and you were like, boy, I wish someone would just be holding this right now while I sand it or whatever, they made that perfect helping hands. But you don't have to tell it anything. It just knows. And it comes and does it. So I like to think that that eliminates the entire loop, and all of a sudden our intent is now just in a robot. And it brings me to this viral video of the swing dancing couple. This was viral maybe like a month ago now. These guys have never danced together. They're trained differently, but by hearing the same song and communicating subtly, they act in perfect sync, like they've done this for years. And I believe, as well as it's my professional goal, that we can relate to our technology as intuitively and synchronously as this group of dancers relates to each other. Like that move, I mean, come on. And sing, it's perfect. And I think we can do it through a thing called context awareness. Because if I thought about flying a drone in this room, well, there's only a couple of key points that would be relevant. We've got some doorways, we've got some steps, we've got a stage. The idea that I care about a particular GPS coordinate in this space is really low. So that's where we can reduce all possible actions down to more like 5 or 6 reasonable places that I might want a drone to be. And somewhere in there is the one that I actually want. And that's a much more tractable problem than trying to fly it directly and think about micro positions. So if I actually did that in, say, a tactical or disaster relief scenario, then we get into some region blocking algorithms, where I might not care if a drone is here, 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 but I might want it to be covering one of these doors. And so what makes this cool is that this idea came around in like 2011 to 14, but they were missing a really powerful ingredient, which is the past 7 years of just ridiculous data science and artificial neural network research. Now we have drones that can see and all but fly themselves. Now we have deep neural networks that can read my EEG and process it to tell what object I'm thinking of. So we have a loop. If I am thinking of this region, and then the drone sees that same region by processing the image, and I get a hit, that's its waypoint. And we do that in a loop, what, once a second, once a half second? Now all of a sudden, I've got an actually viable strategy that I call human intent guided autonomous systems. The thing that I want to work with, I shouldn't have to tell it what to do. I should tell it what I want to happen, and it should figure out the rest autonomously. This is one of only many new paradigms that are being opened through the marriage of AI and BCI. And when I fan them out, I like to split them into read, write, and read, write. When you get to read, you've got all of the stuff like EEG, cognitive assessment, accessibility. When you get to write, you have stuff like, what if I could add a new sense? It was a weird thing in the mid-2000s to put magnets in your fingers to try to sense electromagnetic fields, but that was just hijacking touch. What if you could actually feel a field, like it was some kind of sixth sense? What would art in that be like? But where stuff gets real fun is when you mix read and write at the same time. So you've got real-time trauma recovery, that's where you've got exoskeletons, that's where all the juice is. And for every one of these, there's a company that's doing it. Emotive builds this thing, the Epoch Plus, and they managed to turn electroencephalography from this 30-channel, glued-on, heavily amplified behemoth into this thing that's like, it uses contact solution to connect. It's freaking Bluetooth. I can send it to my computer and get data just like at my house. It takes nothing. And then you go on to like VR, where when people get into VR and they have those omnidirectional treadmills that you run on, what if you could just move forward? Well, OpenBCI is working on that. This thing, yeah, Stentrode, can either read or stimulate in your brain, and it embeds into a red blood cell that goes through your brain. So they can be everywhere in mixed modality. So you're starting to approach like a USB, a plug and play BCI for whatever you're trying to control. I'd be remiss, by the way, if I didn't announce my own company here for the first time, Dwinix, which is going to be exploring a lot of these topics, launched in 2023. But that's neither here nor there. Oh gosh, I almost forgot about the Orion. Someone actually made a blind man see. by putting a camera in glasses and stimulating the visual cortex at the back of your brain. And my favorite part about this is they bypassed your eyes entirely. They were like, no, that's not an eye implant. We're gonna short circuit the whole thing and just go right at the part of your brain that decodes what your eyes see, and we'll hack in there. That's a hacker's mentality. And they're joining the thing too. And that's what's so cool, is you have money pouring into the startups, you have groups taking it as a hacker mentality, and then you couple that with big tech and academia. When you get those 4 different agencies inside, there's very little that you can't solve. And someone once described this as a Cambrian explosion of neurotech, and I think that's an excellent point. So, coming to the end here, I'm a big fan of these iceberg charts, because in the middle of stuff like open armed conflict in the middle of a global health crisis, which is like, come on, there's a lot to be down about. And some of these BCI things, VR control, haptic feedback, non-invasive surgery alternatives, there's a lot to be up about in this field, this rapidly developing paradigm of new technology. And I walk away happy if I've been able to share some of that with you all. So thank you very much. Hit me up anytime. I'm often at SIP downtown, and I would like to go on and look forward to the dinner and bring up your next speaker.